You felt it before. The room went quiet the moment you spoke your truth. And in that hush, you tasted your own power slipping away. They leaned in, calculating, as if every word you uttered was a currency they could devalue. In that flash of betrayal, when your neighbor smiled at you, but his loyalty vanished, you understood the gravity of one silent rule. A law written in shadows centuries ago, whispered in the halls of princes and cutthroats alike, that Machiavelli warned must never be broken. You've chased approval in boardrooms, at bars, even in the mirror, only to watch respect fracture under the weight of your own concessions. You've swallowed your anger until it turned cold and hollow, begging for release. You've survived manipulations so deft, you convinced yourself you deserved the scars. Yet here you stand, tethered to that one fatal misstep, the fracture of your own inner covenant, the promise you made to yourself and the world that you would never surrender your edge. Forget inspiration. This is confrontation with the self that wavered, the self that begged for permission to be less. You will remember how silence answered you when you wavered, how in that gap they climbed all over you. You've been taught that kindness is power. You've been told that vulnerability wins hearts. But kindness without boundaries is a leash. Vulnerability without strategy is a guillotine aimed at your confidence. Now, lean into that echo of lost power. Feel the weight of that law, the one you betrayed when you flinched under pressure. The moment you stop defending your core, they begin rewriting your boundaries. The moment you accept the first slight, you'll endure 1,000 more. Machiavelli knew, one must guard reputation as life itself. Break that law, and you forfeit both. Stay silent no longer. Own the gaze that meets yours in the mirror with unapologetic conviction. Comment below the moment you felt respect slip away. Subscribe if you're ready to reclaim the unbreakable line Machiavelli engraved in history and in your own soul. They circled you like vultures the moment you showed the first crack. You recall the office meeting where your colleague's joke landed like a hammer, and you laughed to blend in. In that laugh was your surrender. They smelled it. They smelled the hesitation in your breath, the doubt that flickered in your eyes. That moment was your first betrayal of the one law. Guard your power without mercy. You walked out of that room hollowed. Every step echoed the lie you told yourself that survival meant shrinking. But survival without presence is death by 1,000 cuts. You felt each one, small slights sharpened against your confidence. A patronizing tone from your boss, a friend who forgot your birthday, a lover who tested your boundaries with laughter too sharp. They all pressed until you receded, and you let them. You made yourself small to fit their needs, forgetting that the smallest compromises have the deepest roots. In the soft afterglow of betrayal, you questioned your own value. You replayed the encounters, turning over every word, every inflection. You cursed your own restraint. You thought restraint was mastery, but without steel, restraint collapses. Restraint without conviction is a noose. You felt your throat tighten each time someone spoke over you. You felt your heart pound as silence swallowed your words before they formed. And in that silence, you betrayed the law again. You let your reputation be rewritten. Feel that weight now. Feel the grain of betrayal running through your veins. It's not shame, it's truth. You are the author of your own respect. No one else holds that pen. When you stopped defending yourself, they started doubting themselves. But you allowed that doubt to flourish into contempt. You let them believe that your silence was weakness. Picture that moment in sharp detail. The hum of fluorescent lights, the endless circular glance around the table, the way their lips curled when they heard you yield. They weren't sorry because they felt guilt. They were sorry because their prey stopped fighting back. They apologized only to restore the dance, not because they cared. That cold realization is your training ground. Now you see the anatomy of control laid bare. They test your limits by pushing just past the line. They watch you recoil. They push again. If you never flinch, they lose their leverage. They call you cold because they can't manage your temperature. Your temperature is set by your resolve, not by their moods. They want to simmer you down, to reduce you to their comfort zone. They want to mold the narrative. But you are neither clay nor motion. You are the silent, unwavering stone they cannot move. Recall every scar that doctrine carved into you. The nights you lay awake, debating whether to speak up. The mornings you arrived at work rehearsing your apology. The half-truths you fed to friends to keep the peace. In each of those lies to yourself, you chipped away at the fortress of your mind. You surrendered pieces of your identity so that others would feel safe around you. But safety is a cage, and cages are built on permission. Permission granted once is permission forever. As soon as you approved your own diminishment, you sealed the deal. They kept testing your boundaries until you had none left. They whispered, coaxed, and manipulated until your conviction faded. They traded on your empathy like currency, and in that economy of entitlement, your empathy became debt. Now, you stand at the edge of a new paradigm. You don't need to scream. You don't need to preach. You need to radiate the stillness that your absence once lacked. The absence of reaction is reaction. When you refuse to engage on their terms, you force them to find new rules. When you refuse to negotiate your core, you reclaim the narrative. This is part 1 of your transformation, a surgical incision into the soft tissue of your old self. The next move is yours. You will feel the world press against the raw edges of that incision, and you will welcome it, because steel is forged under pressure, not in comfort. The law stands. Never break your own power. Keep the line. Hold the edge. Let them come, one sliver at a time, and watch them shatter against your will. The next confrontation arrives without trumpet or warning. It's in the glance of a stranger who underestimates you, the offhand remark from someone who thinks they know your worth. You feel the impulse to soften, to offer context, to soothe their discomfort, because you've learned that explanation is a form of apology. But here, now, you let the moment settle in its raw form. You don't correct their misconception. You don't justify your presence. You observe their surprise at your silence and let it stretch until they squirm. In that extension of time, you reclaim every inch of territory you once ceded. You remember the dinner party where the host introduced you with deliberate hesitance, as though your accomplishments were accidental. Your mouth opened with that practiced humility, shaping a polite correction, but stopped. The air held its breath. Your stillness became a question they couldn't answer. They shifted, uncomfortable, under their own assumptions. That pause was a strike to their complacency. You wielded silence like a blade, precise, cold, undeniable. This is the power of absence. It's the void you create when you refuse to feed their narrative. Others will scramble to fill it, projecting their biases, revealing their agendas. They'll speak for you, invent your story, expose their own fears while pretending they're honoring you. Let them. You watch them dismantle themselves. Their words become evidence of your unspoken strength. They confess to their envy, their insecurities, their need to control. You need only remain still and watch the theater unfold. In that theater, you meet yourself again. You see the remnants of the person who once flinched at criticism, who starved for applause. You feel the residue of every compromise you made to pacify a world that demanded your allegiance. You realize those were not acts of kindness, but betrayals of your sovereignty. Each concession was a notch on their belt, a tally of your self-abdication, and each tally pushed you closer to self-extinction. Now, you stand stripped of illusion. You recognize the moments you traded authenticity for approval, smiles you forced, Nods you faked, agreements you mouthed hollowly, those were the bricks that built your cage. You've spent years polishing them, making them indistinguishable from freedom. But they were never doors. They were bars. You acknowledge that truth without regret. Regret is just another chain. Feel the shift. The awareness that every reaction you withhold is a statement of intent. Withholding is not denial, it's control. You choose what they consume. You choose which of your truths they earn. You decide when the performance begins and ends. You're not a puppet to their expectations. You're the puppeteer whose strings they see only when it suits your design. This part of the body closes with a stark clarity. They will never respect the vulnerable you. They will only respect the version they cannot bend. You've practiced bending to fit. Now practice resistance. Let every glance that tries to shrink you instead echo against the steel of your will. Let every offhand slight rebound as ammunition for your resolve, because power isn't given, it's absorbed, weaponized, and held tight in the mind before it ever touches the world. In the flash of confrontation, your mind sharpens. The world becomes a field of reactions to be catalogued, none of which pierce the cortex of your resolve. The man who leaned in to question your competence in front of a crowd, he saw a flicker of irritation cross your face and recoiled. He expected panic, an apology tangled in stuttered words. Instead, you offered him a smile so still, it was a blade's edge. He left the stage uncertain, his confidence hollow, because you refused to feed his narrative. Recall the text you drafted a dozen times before sending an apology that read like an offering. You hesitated, then deleted it. The draft sat in your outbox, a monument to every time you surrendered your power to avoid discord. In that moment of deletion, you severed the tie that bound you to their imagined need for reassurance. You didn't owe them closure. You owed yourself sovereignty. That act of finality echoed through your psyche like an unspoken vow. Never again will you validate their right to define your worth. You feel the tremor of that vow now. It courses through your veins like an electric current, illuminating every hidden fracture in your psyche. The fractures where you carved your value from their praise. The fissures where you soaked up their approval like water in a drought. You remember the crash of silence when the praise faded, a void so vast it swallowed your identity whole. You crawled back, desperate to hear their approval again. That desperation is a prison, and you built it. Recognize the texture of desperation in your chest, the heat of it, the hunger. You will transform that hunger into vigilance. You will become an architect of presence, not a scavenger of validation. Presence is a fortress built from stillness, observation, and restraint. It doesn't beg to be noticed. It demands attention by refusing to chase it. In your next encounter, you will claim presence before words form. The woman who discounts your ideas before you speak, watch the moment her lips purse in impatience. Let her wait. Feel the power of her discomfort as time stretches. When you finally speak, the weight of that silence will amplify your words. They will land not as entreaties, but as verdicts. They called you cold once as a slur. They used it to dim your light, to paint your detachment as deficiency. But cold is the crucible that tempers steel. Cold is clarity. Cold is the absence of distraction, and you will wield it like a weapon. Let them whisper, cold, behind closed doors. Let them mistake your restraint for weakness. The day they meet your unfiltered edge will rewrite every rumor they spun. Think back to the lover who accused you of being distant, of not caring enough. In their accusation lay the blueprint of their manipulation. They wanted you to feel guilty, to chase their emotional silence. They believed that by accusing you, they could bend your heart to their will. But you refused to close the gap. You let the silence thrum with truth. You cared too much about yourself to be coerced. In that silence, they collapsed. Their power evaporated because they could not negotiate with a fortress. That night, you lay awake, not in longing, but in triumph. You felt the aftershock of your own assertion. The lingering heat was not regret, it was victory. Victory born from acknowledging the law. Never let another's need for you become your burden. Respect is not gifted by affection. Respect is extracted by refusal to be manipulated. Now, you stand on the brink of mastery. The world will continue to test you through family, through friends, through strangers who mistake grace for weakness. They'll ask for favors. They'll bait you with flattery. They'll provoke you with slight. In every moment, you have two choices: yield or resist. And resistance is the only path to unshakable presence. Feel the landscape of your life shift. Where once you saw relationships as give and take, you now see them as fields of influence, maps to be navigated. You choose each step with precision. You reveal just enough to engage, withholding the rest as leverage. You become unpredictable, unreadable, and in unpredictability lies power beyond measure. This is part 4 of your reckoning. You are learning the anatomy of dominance through the geometry of absence, the calculus of restraint. Each pause, each deletion, each withheld reaction is a universal statement. You are not their mirror. You are their measure. They set the trap in the smallest arena: a casual text, a routine meeting invitation, a birthday greeting that felt obligatory. You sense the bait, an implicit demand for emotional labor. The Slack ping arrives with the phrase, "How have you been?" And beneath it, an expectation, production of a narrative, an apology, an update on your emotional availability. In that instant, you hold two choices: perform or persist. You let it sit. You stare at the silence between the ping and your reply, letting your stillness speak volumes. They watch, twitching under the weight of your pause. That pause is an ultimatum. Supply substance or face oblivion. In that oblivion, they confront their own emptiness. They built this expectation from their own loneliness, their own fear of unreciprocated care. They attempted to commodify your attention, to package your empathy as a deliverable. But you never signed that contract. You never joined that economy. Your attention is not a resource to be harvested. It's a domain you defend with quiet ferocity. Feel the electric current of that choice, that fizzing tension between impulse and intention. You could craft a considerate reply, smooth over the discomfort, restore the facade. Instead, you wait. You let the Slack thread gather dust metaphor for every obligation you once honored at the expense of your own time. In that dust lie the echoes of gratitude you never felt, the thanks you never needed. They'll chase the thread. They'll ping again. They'll wonder if you're broken, and in their confusion, you see the shape of your dominion. This dominion is not built on applause, it's carved through absence. Every time you refuse to play their game, you redraw the map of your value. They'll scramble to find the old coordinates, only to discover those landmarks no longer exist. You are no longer the person who obliges. You are the person who obliges only on their own terms. The world tests you in public and private. In the elevator, they ask for a quick favor. It'll take a minute. In group chats, they drop urgent and quick question like landmines. In the debate, they lob personal barbs disguised as wit. You hold your posture. Your face remains still. You respond only when the moment demands gravity. When you speak, your tone is so grounded, it feels like gravity itself pulled the words from your chest. They lean in, because you have stopped leaning toward them. Recall the evening when they cornered you after a conference, demanding your time, your insights, your concessions. They thought exhaustion would break you. They were wrong. You felt the after-hours air thicken with their insistence, but you didn't concede a smile or a nod. You let the room swallow your silence. They left, bereft of your output. They had to recalibrate. They realized their assumptions about you were now liabilities. That's the anatomy of dominance. Create a void so profound that others rush to fill it. Deposit their expectations, and then collapse when you don't comply. Your power lies in orchestrating their dissonance, not in matching their energy. You do not exhaust yourself validating their beliefs. You shatter those beliefs by refusing to validate. Now, internalize this final escalation. You will treat every request, every assumption, as an opportunity to assert sovereignty. You will introduce delays, pauses that feel like tectonic shifts. You will answer questions with questions that expose the asker's motivations. You will refuse to be an open book. You will become the lock and the key. Witness the disarray this causes. They scramble to renegotiate. They offer flattery. They threaten indifference. They bargain with empathy. Let them. Every tactic they deploy reveals their strategy against you. You study their strategy, catalog it, then repurpose it. When they saw you withdraw, they tried coercion. When that failed, they tried reciprocity. When that crumbled, they tried intimidation. You watch each failure widen the chasm between their world and yours. In that chasm, you stand unchallenged. You've become an enigma calculable only by your own terms. You've become the singular axis around which their expectations revolve. And yet, you never moved. All motion was theirs. Your stillness orchestrated the performance. Feel that calm authority settle into your spine. Your shadow, once bending to external forces, now looms tall. Every glance you give carries weight. Every absence, consequence. You no longer measure power by engagement. You measure it by disinterest. Disinterest is the purest form of control, because it cannot be bought or bargained for. This is the final strike of the body. You have achieved unshakable presence through absence, impervious to manipulation through silence. This is the shape of the person you've become, the one who never breaks the law Machiavelli inscribed in the margins of history, the one who preserves the sanctity of their power by never relinquishing it. The world holds its breath as you step back from the fray, unmoved by their ebb and flow. You've carved your silhouette against the currents they once controlled, and in that silhouette lies your final testament. Power is not in what you take, but in what you refuse to surrender. Every glance they cast, every expectation they project, crumbles against the steel of your resolve. You no longer chase respect, you embody it. You no longer seek validation, you redefine its terms. Feel the distance between who you were and who you've become. That distance is your dominion, your unassailable perimeter. They may gather at its edge, shouting demands, flinging pleas, but the gap remains. They cannot cross it, not without your permission, which you will never grant. In that refusal, you exist as a constant, an unbroken signal in a world of static. Your presence is an echo chamber for your own power, resonating long after their voices fade. This is your final truth. Vulnerability is a currency spent, not hoarded. Empathy is a well, not a void to be drained. Respect is not given, it's kept. And the one law Machiavelli etched into memory is now written on your bones. Never break your own power. If you feel the weight of this clarity, comment below and claim your edge. Subscribe to sharpen the silence that forges steel.